The US has begun blocking the Strait of Hormuz after weekend peace talks with Iran broke down. The Iranian military has warned of a harsh response. But how exactly would this blockade work? Well, the US has substantial naval and air forces in the region, which will likely be given this mission. So this marks a shift in the conflict from the skies to the sea. Now, President Trump's blockade applies to all Iranian ports inside and outside the strait. So the US military aims to stop all vessels, regardless of flag, entering or departing these ports, which you can see outlined there in red. Now, vessels suspected of having paid a toll to Iran will also be stopped. The US Central Command says the surveillance would extend east to the Gulf of Oman, which is what you see there, and the Arabian Sea further down, but offered little details on how it would intercept ships trying to transit the area. It's possible US Navy destroyers could track ships coming in and out of ports using their radars. Surveillance drones could also be used to monitor movements. If a vessel is identified, a destroyer could be dispatched to intercept it. It may then communicate over radio, urging the vessel to change course. If that doesn't work, they could forcibly board the ships to search and seize. Now, this US military operation could, of course, face challenges, given that Iran's Revolutionary Guard last weekend warned of a danger zone that's said to be littered with mines. So that's the danger zones. Now, that danger zone forces ships passing through the strait to take an Iran-controlled route, which is very near the shoreline. Our US Central Command says it's begun clearing these mines to create a safe pathway through the strait.
But the logic of the blockade is to pile pressure on Iran and to cut off its oil exports, effectively severing potential income to keep its war economy afloat. But it's important to note that bringing the U.S. Navy to areas this close to Iran would expose them to potential attacks. Along with mines in the vital waterway, Iran has an unknown number of small boats that can carry missiles that could fire at American ships.
For more on this, we're joined by James Kraska. He's chair of Stockton Center for International Law at the US Naval War College. He's also visiting professor of law at Harvard Law School. Professor Kraska, thank you so much for joining us. So let's start with this blockade. I'm wondering what the net effect is going to be for oil, not just oil flows, but all shipping, because if, the US blocks all ships, coming to and from Iranian ports, and Iran blocks all other ships deemed unfriendly, it doesn't seem anything is going to get through.
Well, that's the objective of a blockade, which is it must actually be effective as a matter of law, as a lawful measure in naval warfare. And so all Iranian ports, the Iranian coastline, and any oil terminals are blockaded, and that will prevent the exit or the entry of ships from all nations. And this is a lawful wartime measure that the U.S. Navy can impose in order to try to induce Iran to open the strait and to comply with the international law of the sea.
Professor, the estimate that we have right now is $435 million a day in terms of the economic cost to Iran. I'm wondering if you can give your best assessment of Iran's ability to survive such a blockade, given that, it's been, I suppose, degraded in many ways, not just militarily, but economically as well, over the past 6 weeks of the campaign.
Well, that's certainly the idea, is to bring pressure, economic pressure upon Iran. And the law of naval warfare has a large economic component. And so that's what the United States is now exercising. And of course, the U.S. blockade aligns itself with the interests of countries from outside the region, such as China and other users of Iranian oil that now have an incentive to also bring pressure on Iran to normalize flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is not any longer going to be in a position to be able to interdict other nations' shipping while having its own shipping flow through the Strait of Hormuz. So Iran's position here is, in the words of Singapore's foreign minister, actually pure banditry. And it really cannot stand, both from the United States standpoint, as well as for all the other countries in the world that rely on Arabian Gulf oil shipping.
Okay, so Professor, if we can just drill down to how this blockade could actually work on the water. Now, if U.S. forces stop and search vessels in or near the Strait of Hormuz, are commercial ships obliged to comply with U.S. demands, or do they have the right to challenge or refuse? And what happens if they do?
It's a great question. So, actually, under the law of naval warfare and the rules concerning blockade, once states are involved in an armed conflict, like the United States and Iran in this case, then all neutral shipping from every different country, Panama, Liberia, Malta, Greece, other neutral states, actually those vessels must comply. They have a legal duty to submit to the belligerent right of visit and search. The purpose of that visit and search is to determine the enemy character of the ships and their cargo. Now, ordinarily, this can often be done through electronic means, through certificates that are electronic, and other technical means of determining what kind of ship it is and what sort of cargo it is and where the vessel is bound for. But in cases in which the United States elects to exercise the right of visit and search, it may do so. The obligation of flags of all nations ought to comply or must comply. Now, if they decline to comply, then they are subject to enforcement measures.
And Professor, adding another layer to this complexity is there are reports of Iranian naval mines in the strait. What does international law require of states that deploy them? And what happens if they don't properly declare or track them?
So this is actually inconsistent with the law of naval warfare to release mines and not track them. And remember that the very first case of the International Court of Justice was the Corfu Channel case, which is quite similar, in which Albania had strewn mines through the Corfu Channel. And the International Court of Justice held that Albania was presumed to be responsible for mines that were within its waters in an international strait. And of course, the same applies here, that Iran is responsible for identifying mines. It may not put mines in international sea lanes. And if Iran now has lost track of those mines, of course, they have not complied with their duty, and they ought to then stand aside so that the international community can clear those mines and ensure safe shipping.
Prof, I'm wondering, are naval mines governed by the same treaties as land mines, which we know, even though there are treaties, have been left in places where they should not have been and have been left unmarked in many places as well around the world in previous conflicts?
Yeah, so there are different agreements, different treaties that govern each of these. The law concerning mines on land are much more recent. The prohibitions that I mentioned derive from a Hague Convention in 1907. But really what we're looking at for the law of naval warfare is largely customary international law. That is, it's not actually codified in any single treaty, although there are some handy references like the Newport Manual on the law of naval warfare, which reflects customary law and contains the rules governing law of naval warfare.
All right, Professor Kraska, we have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for your insight this morning. We've been speaking with James Kraska, chair of Stockton Center for International Law at the US Naval War College.